I'd now like to invite up on the stage Jonathan Turpin. Jonathan is the principal of the AIM Group out of the United Kingdom, and he's going to talk about why take rates are not a good comparison.
Thank you, Simon. In fact, I'm going to look at a range of benchmarking data across real estate markets, and I hope, picking up on Malcolm's point, it's so noticeable that Raya is on the very extremes of many of his charts. I hope I'm going to give you a little bit of insight as to exactly why that is. So let's kind of kick off. For those of you who don't know the AIM Group, we're a business intelligence business. We focus solely on marketplaces and classifieds across the real estate, automotive, recruitment, and horizontals business sectors. We do three things. We have a subscription or various subscription services with analysis and news about the segments. We run conferences. We don't run one in property due to Simon's excellent conferences. And we do a little bit of consulting too. And today's presentation kind of comes out of a lot of the consulting we've been doing. Over the last 18 months, we've been doing a fair amount of work in real estate. We've been looking quite a lot at benchmarking between marketplaces. We've been doing a lot of work on business models, high-level pricing strategies, and how you build product strategies to support pricing. And I want to give you a little bit of insight out of that. We've looked at quite a lot of confidential data. None of that's in this deck, and everything you'll see today is public information. But I can tell you that all the private information we've seen kind of draws to exactly the same conclusions that I'm going to spell out today. So my colleague Konstantin Kalabin says real estate markets are more different than similar. One of the things that has stunned us, as we've gone deep across lots of markets over the last year, is quite how marketplaces manage to be so different in every market. If you look at the product side, look at how they manage search, look at how they monetize, it's very hard to find two marketplaces that have an identical model. And a big part of that, I think, lies in the history, the background, the broader real estate environments in which they operate. So I want to kind of give you a sense of that, hopefully in numbers, as to why the markets are actually quite different. But first, a bit of warning on numbers from consultants like me and others and so on. There are a lot of data challenges, even with public data, in trying to compare markets. And I just want to give you a kind of sense of those. First of all, agent commission rates, and we'll come back to take rates and some of the questions around them later. But agent commission rates in most markets are anecdotal. Marketplace revenues, you all like to report them in totally different ways. And it's very hard. Sometimes you have to make some assumptions to put them on an equivalent basis. Transaction volumes, actually in many markets, they're unofficial numbers. Some markets, the UK, there are two entirely different numbers, even though they're both from very good bodies that really just don't tie up. Some markets just don't have those numbers. Agent share of home sales, if you want to create a take rate and other kind of interesting comparative benchmarks, you need to know what % of homes agents are selling. That number is not recorded anywhere in any market I know. It's kind of an anecdotal number in terms of what's there. You can get a feel of it, but it's very, very rarely, you get a good feel of it, but it's very rarely part of the public statistics. And then average home prices. Well, sometimes they're reported as means, sometimes they're reported as medians, sometimes they're even reported as the average value of a home in the country rather than the average value of a sale. So what I'm going to say about these numbers is just be slightly careful with them. There are enough kind of inconsistencies that, you can draw some broad conclusions, but don't kind of put, A, it's at 8% and B is at 9% and believe that that's actually necessarily true. The vagaries in the numbers are enough that they're not going to be perfect, and the comparisons of close numbers are never going to be perfect. So I'm going to start off with just some marketplace environments. We all know that house prices vary differently by country. By the way, this deck will go out afterwards, and don't worry about kind of reading every last piece of data off it. It'll be part of the final batch. We all know house prices vary substantially by country. Clearly, in growth markets, they're a lot lower currently, a lot higher elsewhere. How many people, I wonder, know, though, that Australia has an average house price roughly 70, 80% higher than the UK. An extraordinary difference, and we'll kind of come back to that in getting at that rare question. But when you look at the performance of markets, understanding the average house price is a really kind of key piece of information because it defines what's available to the marketplaces, how they can work, and it will define the stage of development in terms of product and strategy. Another kind of area, how many homes are resold in a country? It varies substantially by country, and there are lots of different reasons that it varies. So the resale rate, the turnover rate of homes, is often, for cultural reasons, low. There are countries like Germany, and if I had Switzerland and Austria here too, you'd find the same thing, where really a home is for life and you buy it for life. And it's treated that way. There are other countries, Australia, actually the UK to some degree, etc., where the culture is much more that your home is an asset. It's a traded item. It's viewed as a part of your personal wealth. And the transaction rate tends to be higher in those countries. There are other factors as well that determine that rate, taxation, etc. But you will see, a reasonable variance between countries in the turnover. And actually, just going back to that, you'll notice again, whoops, sorry, I'm going, wrong way. How do I go backwards? Can't go backwards. Okay, sorry about that. That's the whole, could someone just put it back to the beginning again? Sorry about this. For some reason, the backward key is not working. Oh, it's doing it now. Okay, whoops, I was just trying to go backwards. Resale homes, volume, the level of transaction, again, Australia is one of the highest around the globe. So back to going forward, you look at home rental, you see similar kind of patterns. Germany again, Switzerland, Austria, you would find for cultural reasons, there are historic reasons, actually slightly different in each of those countries. There are very high rental rates in the country. If we go to the former Soviet Union, the effective nationalization, privatization of homes at the end of the Cold War, not the end of the Cold, well, yes, the end on the collapse of the Soviet Union, meant that home ownership is very high in those countries. So you find some kind of deep cultural reasons for differences in home rental rate. And all of those affect the way you benchmark and compare marketplaces. So turning to revenue and kind of normalizing the revenues we see at the leading marketplaces in countries, we've kind of turned here the data into marketplace revenue per household and shown the comparison. And as on Malcolm's chart, you can see that REA is an extraordinary kind of amount above everything else. You can also see I've split it into two parts. The blue are the vendor paid marketplaces, and the orange are agent paid. Vendor paid being where the seller of the home pays some or all of the advertising directly rather than it coming via the agent. And if I put Trade Me on here, it would be in that blue element, and if I put Funder, which is the fifth of the vendor paid, the Netherlands is the fifth of the vendor paid countries around the world, I would find that it was at the other end. I would find it's in the orange. Funder is estate agent owned. It's not been run on a commercial basis, but aside from that, all the rest of the vendor paid models tend to outperform the agent paid models. You've got to be slightly careful in that Fin and Hemnet and Trade Me and actually Funder are all very dominant marketplaces, but REA is the exception, and we've put as an exception here Domain as the only number 2 in these slides to show how that compares. And even Domain is ahead of the agent paid markets in terms of its return. So why is that? So I want to kind of take a closer look. We took all the data all the way back pretty much to the beginning for REA, for Rightmove, for Scout, and we normalized it on a per population basis. Couldn't do it per household because the household data isn't available consistently, but it gives you a similar and an effective trend. And we look at the growth over time of the per capita revenues, and we find back in the early days of real estate portals, in 2005, REA was already at 2.5 times per capita the revenue of Rightmove. You go through into the 2010s, it's about 4 times. At 2022, it was just under 5 times the multiple. An extraordinary difference, and you can see that Rightmove and Scout, both agent paid, are absolutely on a similar track down below. So 2 big things happened over this period of time, and that particularly affected REA in a particular way. The first of these is just the boom in Australian property prices. In the UK, we thought property went mad over this period. It did go mad over this period in terms of growth in house prices. But between 2004 and 2021, average house prices in Australia grew at twice the rate of those in the UK. Just an extraordinary growth. And that's a huge part of why this line is so different. And then the second thing is the evolution of the vendor-paid model. Australia was vendor-paid all the way through. Simon was very helpful in explaining some of the early years to me of how that worked. Around 2008 through to about 2013, the model really evolved and accelerated in terms of how it was executed. And as a result of that, REA kind of also was set on a different path. Now, the question that's always interested us is the one that says, well, okay, you've got these 2 very different paths. Is this simply about, vendor-paid versus agent-paid models? So we decided we'd look at Rightmove versus REA, and we'd try and kind of break that down. And you can do that, and we've done it for 2022. And you can argue, it says approximate in big letters at the bottom. You have to make some assumptions to kind of get to the end result. But we think there are kind of 4 significant factors in the difference between them. And the factor that I think most people probably don't recognize that is absolutely at the top of the list, is the biggest, is simply the average home sale price difference between the countries. On its own, it accounts for REA being 80% higher in revenue than Rightmove. Secondly, going back to that earlier slide of the turnover rate of homes, the sale rate, much higher in Australia. That on its own would count for about 70% of higher price versus, or higher revenue at REA versus Rightmove. We then get to the share of sales through agents. You can argue these numbers. They're estimates. They could be slightly different. It's a small factor, but it plays slightly into the Australian kind of picture as well. And then finally, you can break out all the other stuff, which is the marketplace's take from the home sale price, the take rate from the home sale price as opposed to from the commission. And in Australia, that's about 40% higher than in the UK. So if we kind of isolate it out, it may be that of that 4.9x, 1.4 of it is down to vendor paid, and it can also be down to differences in performance of the businesses in other ways. But actually, the biggest factors by far are the different environmental factors that exist within the Australian marketplace. And there is one final factor, because you can see it adds up to 4.6. There are other revenues other than agent revenues, clearly at both REA and Rightmove, and they account for a little bit of difference as well, as REA is comfortably ahead in those other revenue areas. So kind of trying to move on towards take rates, I kind of said, commissions, slightly kind of difficult numbers. They're estimated in all markets. Here we've got the commission rates for the 11 markets we've looked at here, and you can see there's a huge variety from top to bottom by country. But one of the most notable things about these commission rates is that 6 out of the 11 end in a 0.0 or a 0.5. Statistically, it ought to be 2 or 3 of them. And what this means is that actually these rates are nearly all estimates, rounded, highly uncertain in terms of where they are. And they could be, plus or minus 20% typically out from where the real rates are. And this is one of the problems, one of the biggest problems in kind of comparing take rates, which we'll kind of get to in a minute. But you can see what makes the differences in commission rates. There are some hyper-competitive markets in terms of agents. In the UK, it's a very competitive agent space. We have very low commission rates. We know in the US, at the other end of the extreme, there are separate buyer and seller agents. Commission is shared between them. Traditionally, it's been structured in a way mandated by the National Association of Realtors, and that has helped sustain what we would argue is an artificially high commission rate. And that may be about to collapse because of certain legal actions in the States. So there are kind of some very big reasons that commission rates vary substantially, but also I caution you that they're not typically accurate and they're not ideal comparators, and that causes some problems when you get into other areas. Now we're going to get into take rates, which are favorite consultants' kind of comparison. I just want to talk you very quickly through how we calculate take rates. We do it in a very simple way for real estate marketplaces. Here's an example I'm going to use from Rightmove in 2022. We take the total agent revenue from Rightmove, £247 million in 2022. We then want to know what the size of the commission pool is. To do that, we take the number of transactions, we look at the agent's share of transactions, and we calculate out the number of transactions by agents. We then multiply that by the average property price, and then we apply the commission rate that we have from the market at 1.2%, and that gives us Malcolm's commission pool. And I noticed that when Malcolm calculates his take rates and our take rates, they're different. And that's because the data will have made different assumptions kind of along the way in doing it. So we take a very simple approach to take rates. Arguably, we should have rental revenue in here. It is within the marketplace revenues, because in most marketplaces you cannot separate rental and sales revenue, but it's near impossible to get a view of what the agent takes in rental revenues. There are no consistent numbers between markets, and therefore that's another big factor in causing kind of distortions when comparing take rates. So if we kind of calculate out take rates, we then divide the marketplace revenue from agents by the commission pool, and that gives us a percentage. And you can see it varies very substantially between markets. And interestingly, this is kind of about the only chart that REA doesn't sit right on the left-hand side. So the question is, what does this really tell us? Usually we use take rates to do two things. We want to compare the performance of different marketplaces. So I'd ask the question here of, is REA really somehow underperforming Finn in Norway? Is that why its take rate is so much lower? I mean, given all we've seen about its performance in Malcolm's presentation earlier on the numbers here, I think the answer is obviously no. The reality of the take rate comparison is that Finn operates in a market with a very low commission rate, 1%, and it has a house price level about 2/3 of REA's. And those factors impact the level of take that the marketplace can make. So really, these are not good comparisons in terms of the performance of marketplaces against each other. It's the environmental factors, and you have to understand the environmental factors to understand how the performance compares. If I draw another comparison, Malcolm pointed out that Hemnet looks in a position to really improve from where it is on his very good analysis of how it sits within kind of GDP and performance. And we agree, he's absolutely spot on right. Hemnet's in the very early stages, it's still in high growth mode, but its take rate is almost the same as REA's. So what does that tell you? I think in reality, the take rates tell you very little. The other thing that we use take rates for is we like to say, well, is the market going to top out in some way? So, clearly those on the right of the chart have potential to grow a lot more. But what about Finn? On the left of the chart, the highest of the take rates in this sample. Has it topped out? Look at its performance in the last 2 years, public revenue figures. It has had 2 phenomenal years of growth. It appears to be nowhere near topping out. So even when we look at take rates and use them to say, where can these marketplaces go, it appears they're not yet anywhere near telling us that the market is kind of topping out. So, okay, take rates, you've got to be cautious, you've got to understand the data. They're useful in some ways, but they're kind of, only part of the picture. Is there a better kind of measure? Well, there's one measure that we like better than take rates. Oh, I've probably already talked through this one. I'm going to just flick through it. There's one measure we like better. Oh, sorry. Let's try that again. Better than take rates. And this is the very complex sounding agent revenue per agent sold home as a share of average home price. It's a measure that doesn't involve commission, so it gets rid of the most dodgy set of numbers in comparisons. And if you look at this chart from right to left, you'll see it's much, much flatter than the take rate chart, that the numbers here are much closer to each other. So basically, this is taking the amount of revenue the marketplace takes from real estate agents, and it's looking at it on a per home basis, and it's dividing it into the cost of the home. The Arudis figure on the left, I'd be slightly suspect. We've been round and round it 4 times. You have to make a certain number of estimates. We think the market data may not be as reliable as it needs to be to put something right at the extreme. Scout 24 is helped a bit, and its number would come down by the fact that it's a strong rental market. And then you see that there's actually an amazing consistency around the percentage of revenue that marketplaces take as a share of home price. And it's probably the best benchmark of where things are and where things used to be. So to leave you with one final thought on this, REA is at 0.14% of the home price. Back in the days of newspapers, in Australia, they used to have 1% as the benchmark for what the newspapers could take out of the home sale price. Same in the UK, and I've heard other markets, similar kind of rules apply. So it suggests that, compared to those historic lows, we're not just a long way down in terms of a share of the house price, we're a long, long way down. And coming back to the final point, Malcolm made about, Rightmove and desire to take, I think it was 15% of take rate, it seems to me that marketplaces still have a long way to go before they either begin to get in difficulty against agent commission or get into difficulty in terms of the amount of the house price that they're taking. So I'll leave you with that as a last thought. Thank you. Too many numbers.
Too many numbers, and I got a lot of questions. Can we go? Oh, no, I don't want to go back to the slide. When you're talking about, so in the vendor-paid advertising markets,
yep.
One of the things that makes it a bit more complex is that not every home is vendor-paid advertising.
Yep.
So when you think about the take rate from an agent in a
yep.
vendor-paid advertising market, where the agent's not paying for
so
the advertising.
Let's be really clear. We include the money that comes from the seller within the
commission.
Within the marketplace revenue that we divide by the commission. So it should be that vendor-paid markets are always high on take rate because you've got non-agent money counted in the whichever one it is. Is it the denominator or the?
Okay, understand. So you basically inflate the commission that the agents by the amount spent. Got that. Markets like Australia are not all vendor-paid advertising. I think I was chatting with Tony the other day when I was in Melbourne. Was it 40% of the market or so is vendor-paid advertising, and 60% is agent-paid advertising.
Yep.
So you get this sort of interesting blend, and that's where the model needs to be you almost need to split it in 2 buckets.
Yeah.
Because I think if you looked at something like an REA vendor-paid advertising, there's a different take rate to REA non-vendor-paid advertising.
There will be, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, we've done a lot of work on vendor paid. I've talked to maybe 10, 12 people who are there at the origins of vendor paid in different markets. And Vendor paid is actually different by market. The history is very different. People make certain assumptions about it that, it kind of had to come from the newspaper world or whatever. A lot of those assumptions actually, when you get under the surface and look at all the 5 markets, aren't correct. And one of the most interesting questions, I think, is whether you can take the vendor paid model into other markets.
That's an interesting question, right? Because we know, if I remember correctly, about 2010, maybe 2012 in the United Kingdom, Rightmove did an experiment where it would allow in some regions a vendor to upgrade their listing themselves. Yeah. How did that go? Do you remember that? I don't know if you remember.
I don't know that one.
Okay, well, I will tell you. I'll tell you it. So Rightmove did an experiment in, I don't remember the exact part of England, where what they would do is on the listings in that area, there was a button that says if you own this home and would like to make it a feature property or go to the top of the search or whatever, click the button, put your credit card in, and you can upgrade it, or you can go to your agent and get the same outcome, but pay 20% less or whatever, right? So it was designed to work nicely with the agents, not to go around the agents. Didn't work, okay?
Yeah.
And I think the big issue in that is culture. It's a very hard to change something that's ingrained in a society about how you buy, sell, and what you do in that process.
But I think as well, all the vendor paid models that work well leverage the agents and leverage the agents to sell the advertising. Even in Australia and New Zealand, the agent doesn't benefit. At Hemnet, the agent does benefit, or doesn't benefit directly in terms of money. They don't benefit substantially in terms of branding and brand positioning. Yeah. So, I think to make it work, you have to make the agent environment work. And I think that's the key to it. And I think the market to watch is Ireland, because there are some experiments going on there, and there's some legal actions going on there as well that are interesting to watch that kind of relate back. But I think we'll get the first feel, out of Ireland maybe, of whether you can push vendor paid into other markets in a more interesting kind of direction.
So how to measure and manage the suggested metrics agent revenue per agent sold home as a share of the average home price? Most agent, I don't quite understand the question. Most agents deals differ from average price.
So I think the question is saying, agents charge all kinds of different rates for, and they may not be related to average home price. But the point about that last metric is it takes out commission, it takes out all those things. It just compares marketplaces and house prices at a level. And what you see is a very consistent pattern that you don't see in the take rate metrics. And that's the kind of interesting pattern, I think, to watch. And that's the one that sets the kind of levels you can achieve and where you can grow from, if that makes sense.
I understand. How do you think AI-powered search, more precise results, will impact take rates?
Well, I think it's a slightly broader question. How do I think AI-powered search will affect the whole of the kind of environment? And I'm with Malcolm that this is going to fundamentally change the nature of the model. And let me give you a sense, if I look 5 to 10 years ahead and look at what the AI technology is doing at the moment, this is how I imagine having my search. I imagine I'm talking to my screen. And talking is definitely coming and talking to your screen. And it may not be my computer any longer, because I'm imagining my AI concierge is going to work on different devices. It'll be the same concierge for me on my computer, on my television, on my Alexa, etc. So I imagine I'm having a conversation with the AI, and I can see the technology going this way. And I'm imagining, maybe it's a face, and maybe it says, well, Jonathan, these have come up, they kind of match your criteria. Do you want to have a look at them? And it flicks through a few on the screen. I say, oh, stop, go back one. I want to see that one. What's it like inside? And it shows me inside, and it's learning what I'm doing. So I imagine an interface that is very immersive, in a 5 to 10 year time frame. It's absolutely different from where the search we have today is. And as Malcolm says, that totally undoes the current method of thinking around premium elements to sales. And one fundamental in that is is, you have to move more towards a listings-based rather than a subscriptions-based kind of view of the world, or at least an equivalent to a listings basis, as you think about commercial models in that environment, because you're going to lose a lot of the kind of VAS opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of these marketplaces make money off actually being inefficient.
Yeah, totally.
Okay? Where it's all about putting an ad that you didn't ask for first.
Yeah.
And then, eventually you get to the actual what you asked for.
Yeah.
So,
although to be fair, it's a little bit more sophisticated in some cases than just about inefficiency. A lot of the VAS money is actually made off homes that are hard to sell. Yes. And I think you've got to begin to get yourself into a mindset that says, I've got all these homes that are easy to sell, and I've got this bunch that are hard to sell. How do I really monetize that? Because that's what the agent needs help on. That's what the seller needs help on. And that's the opportunity.
Do you think then the premier agent type model, where they're taking a percentage of the commission for sending the lead, so it's now moving way to this performance-based advertising, would then creep its way into these markets where the portal and the agents are working hand in hand, but on a success basis?
So I think that's the natural way for models to go in theory. The one thing we know, though, is that people are resistant to changes of model, etc., and it's a very big kind of jump to get into a transactional-based model. So it should go that way. I think it will get forced eventually to go that way due to the nature of the AI-based environments. But I think it'll go kicking and screaming in that direction. It's the last thing most of the participants will want in the market, and it may take some disruptive play before that happens.
Okay. Jonathan, thank you very much. I love how you guys think about it.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing your thoughts again.
Pleasure.
I need that.